Ding ding. Well, welcome back, everybody. If you're reading along, you can see a picture of what the Pasha looks like a little bit. With the fez on top of his head. He's a rather large man, and he does look a little bit intimidating there. But here we begin with, at long last, back to Merida on the Yucatan Peninsula, Mexico, 1967. We're back to Remesio, and he's getting ready to exact his revenge on the Pasha. Ding ding, here's the story, picking back up. The Pasha had mixed feeling once he had the Japanese collector's money. He appreciated the Jaguar for its own sake. It was a beautiful piece of sculpture, and a part of him wanted to keep it. On the other hand, he was jealous of it. He had no doubt he could make an acceptable duplicate, but he could never have imagined such a thing on his own. He simply wasn't capable of creating anything original. He had come to terms with that inability many years earlier when he was young and forging paintings in his country of birth, Turkey. Every so often, though, something like the Jade Jaguar would remind him of his lack of creative originality, and he would turn maudlin. Because he did not want to cry in front of the Japanese collector, he began to laugh. It started out as a quiet laugh, a chuckle really, but it grew into a bellowing guffaw. And soon he was out of control. His face became as red as an adobe tile, and spittle escaped his lips, hanging from his greasy mustache in a disconcerting fashion. His eyes danced with a mad glee until beads of sweat rolled off his brow and into them, causing his eyes to sting. And when he saw the surprised, fearful look on the face of the taciturn Japanese, he banged his fist on the table and laughed even harder. Finally, he started coughing and eventually regained his composure. All his years of crime had brought him to a very thin line from insanity, and perhaps even over it. During this confusing fit, the Japanese collector had been thinking frantically of a polite way to leave. The fat man's behavior was quite bizarre, and it made the collector understandably apprehensive. This was no laughing matter. There was money involved. Seeing no honorable way out, he simply bowed and headed for the door. He had just managed to turn the knob. "I wouldn't open that if I were you," squawked an unfamiliar voice in barely acceptable Japanese. The collector turned around. The Pasha looked too. On the windowsill, at the other side of the room, sat Raja, calmly preening himself. To the astounded Pasha, he said, in much better Turkish, "What's the matter? You never heard a talking parrot before?" Dumbstruck, the Pasha thought about what the parrot had said and then looked over to the collector, who was visibly shaken. Once again, the Pasha burst out in hopeless laughter. He looked at the collector and pointed at the bird, all the while laughing hysterically. His whole body shook. His uncomfortable chair creaked and the floor groaned. As this maniacal laughter continued, his right hand found its way down to the pistol in the second drawer of the desk. It came up quickly, blasting stray bullets all around Raja, who managed to fly away unscathed, but decidedly ticked off. Those bullets were way too close for comfort. Humans! In a split second, the gun was taken out of the Pasha's hand and pointed back at him by Remesio Treviso. He had quietly entered the room and blended into the surroundings when the collector had opened the door. "Nah, I don't suppose you have a permit for this?" asked Remesio, smirking at the Pasha. The Pasha stopped laughing. The problem with the black market business, he thought to himself, was that you could never completely trust the people you dealt with. "What are you doing here?" he hissed like a snake. "I thought we had a deal." "The deal's been changed, Pasha. Now put your hands behind you." Remesio handcuffed the fat man, just barely getting the cuffs around his meaty wrists. The metal cut into the Pasha's skin, causing him to wince. "Remember Caracas, 12 years ago? Or a kid named Pablo Morales? You changed the deal on him, permanently." Remesio's hardened heart began to beat faster. He, too, was beginning to lose control. "Are you referring to that arrogant little mendicant Pablo Morales? He tried to steal from me," shouted the Pasha. "He was nothing." That was all Remesio needed to hear. He slapped the Pasha hard enough with the back of his hand to knock the big man out of his chair, and then gave the Pasha a kick to his gut, causing him to gasp for air. Next, he took the money from the desk and put it in his knapsack. Last, he looked at the Japanese collector, who was crouched in the corner of the room. Remesio held out his hand expectantly, and the collector humbly brought the jaguar to him. Remesio then withdrew from his knapsack the Mayan calendar he had stolen over a week earlier from the National Museum in Mexico City and placed it on the desk. The jaguar he placed in his knapsack with the money. "I think Pablo would have wanted you to have this Mayan calendar, Pasha. It should earn you a nice stay in the local prison and help you keep track of the time you serve. I also heard they have a good weight reduction program. You might want to look into that." "You and I are not finished," muttered the Pasha. Like a turtle on its back, the helpless Pasha had no way of getting back up. Remesio looked out the window. The police had arrived and would be up shortly. He whistled twice, and Raza returned to the windowsill. "He's crazy," said the parrot, referring to the Pasha. "He almost killed me." "How much time do I have?" "I'd say about a minute. You better get moving." Remesio shooed him off. He had one more thing to do. He pulled the roll of masking tape from his knapsack and tore off the strip he had been writing on earlier at the cafe. "You're no better than Pablo or me," sputtered the Pasha as he tried to roll over. Slapping the Pasha once more for good measure, Remesio put the tape across the Pasha's mouth, sealing it. "Maybe this'll shut you up," he said. The Pasha struggled to breathe through his nose, which turned his face an even darker shade of red. It almost matched the color of ink Remesio had used to write the word murderer that was now taped across his mouth. Remesio studied the gun in his hand, tipped his hat to the Japanese collector, and with his pulse now under control, headed out of the room and into the hallway, where he quickly blended into the surroundings. He was surprised and a little happy to discover that he could not kill the Pasha. Ding, ding, ding. And now the next section is titled Roan. So maybe you got to think about this a little bit. Roan, we thought, was washed over the dam and out of the picture. So right now, I wonder how many of you are happy to see the part of this section titled Roan coming back into play. And it begins in 1967, essentially the same time now that Remesio is dealing with the Pasha and stealing the jaguar back from him and sending the Japanese collector on his way. So what's going on now? Remesio's an older guy, and Roan appears to be an older guy. So what happened there? What happened with Roan? Let's find out. Ding, ding, ding. The Smithsonian Institution, Washington, D.C., 3 days later. So this is 3 days after Remesio has exacted revenge on the Pasha. When he had been washed over the dam, Roan felt as if he were in slow motion, awed by the beauty of the crystal water as it danced around him. He thought that Remy would really like to try blasting over the waterfall himself if it didn't mean dying. He thought about the Shantaya and how he was going to miss them. He thought about his mom and dad and hoped that they would find him, either on earth or in heaven. He hoped that they'd be okay and not too angry with him and Remy for skipping school. He thought some more about Remy and hoped that he had had enough time to find safety. He was sure that if he did survive, Remy would become a great adventurer who battled against thieves and criminals. Roan thought it was strange that he could think of all these thoughts simultaneously as he was plunging to his death. Shouldn't he be scared? But he just kept going down, watching the beautiful liquid flow around him, wondering if anybody else was in the water and feeling the same way, feeling strangely at peace. The last thought he had before crashing to the bottom was that dying was a strange way to celebrate a birthday, and it made him laugh. He roared over the dam and crashed into the soft, muddy bottom of the river. The violent thrashing of the water somehow shot him back to the surface and carried him several miles downstream. And it wasn't until his body had become entangled in thick, heavy brush that he came to a very fortunate stop. And there he stayed, entangled, barely breathing, and just barely alive. 2 days later, and in a state of semi-consciousness, a strangler fig tree trunk, charging down the river, crashed into the heavy brush that surrounded Roan. The pain from its impact hammered him back into full consciousness. He was badly bruised with a broken arm, and he was famished. But, he realized, he wasn't dead. Somehow, he had survived. His arm hung akimbo from his shoulder, wedged between two heavy reeds. Any sudden movement caused his broken bones to scrape together, creating a pain that was practically unbearable. Yet he lived. A miracle. The devastation around him was total. The river was replete with the wreckage of Minas Nuevas, and the water level was rising. He realized he would have to free himself from the brush that had probably saved his life. He knew it was going to be painful, too. Moving slowly at first, the scraping of bone against bone almost caused him to faint. Roan understood he was in a dangerous situation, and that he could not afford to pass out again. Reaching over with his good hand, he put a firm grip on the broken arm and yanked it from between the reeds as hard as he could. "Ah!" he cried, grabbing onto some brush, and then he vomited. He felt himself beginning to pass out while his grip on the brush was weakening. Desperate and whimpering, he scrambled to stay above water. Preparing to swim, doubting he'd get far in his weakened state and with his broken arm, Rome began to say his prayers as he floated into the destruction around him. Luckily, he managed to catch on to a piece of a red tin roof that had floated his way. With the last bit of strength in his good arm, he pulled himself up onto the battered tin and immediately passed out. He had no idea how long he was unconscious, and he never felt the Yanomami fishermen pull him into their canoe. Ring, ring, and that's where we stop. Ding, ding. So, we pick up with Roan, who's alive. I hope you're happy to hear that. And now you got to be thinking some more like, well, where is this story going? How could Roan be alive back then as a kid? The same day all that stuff washed away, and what happened to Roan and Remesio? How did they never find each other? How are they separated for all these years? Because Remesio ended up in Caracas, Venezuela. So what's happened to Roan? And this piece started out in Washington, D.C. And we hear a ringing at the end of this part. The Smithsonian Institution, 3 days after the grown-up Remesio has gotten revenge on the Pasha. So I want you now thinking about where this is going to take us at this point. Hope you're enjoying it. It's starting to get interesting.